Hey everybody, welcome to Office Hours with Dylan Hutchison, where we talk about the great people of cybersecurity in the channel. I'm joined by none other than Roddy Bergeron. Roddy, how's it going today?
Man, it is going wonderful. We're out here in South Louisiana living our best life. Dealing with rain, dealing with questions from parents. As you know, I'm on the school board here in Lafayette Parish, and dealing with questions from parents about like what's going to happen with school today. Is it going to rain too much? And it's a typical day for me. I'm enjoying it.
They're like, please let my kids go back to school. I'm tired of them being at home with me all day, every day.
Well, you get both sides of the fence on that, right? You get people who are just like, I don't want my kids to go out in this weather. The weather's bad. I'm concerned that they're going to come back, and it's valid concerns. I don't want to downplay their concerns because it is valid, right? Like having grown up in rural Louisiana, right, where I lived on a road with like 5 people, and it flooded every time it rained. Like, yeah, it's tough. It's tough. But on the same time, you have parents who are just like, please, I can't. I work from home, and I don't want my kids. I don't want my kids at home with me, and so you get both sides of it, and it's interesting, like juxtaposition of parents sometimes, and that's part of being a politician is working through the issues and talking with people, and so far so good. I've had some interesting conversations with people about education and everything else, but hey, it's definitely the job that I wanted and the job I applied for, and I'm grateful for it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've always had a huge emphasis on education, whether it's, K through 12 or educating MSPs, and we'll get into all of that fun stuff later on. But talking through, hey, growing up on a farm to life at the MSP to the vendor, just give us your intro, your origin story.
Oh man! So was born on a warm summer day in South Louisiana. No, I mean, like, I wouldn't say I had a typical, or I would say I had a semi-typical childhood in South Louisiana. Right, grew up on a farm. We had farmland. We had raised soybean and rice and crawfish, and we had animals. So we had anywhere. I think at the most we had probably close to 200, cows, and we had chickens and pigs and the other fun stuff. But that's where I learned how to practical skills. Where I learned how to weld. That's where I learned how to do electrical work and plumbing. And kind of my fascination with how broken things get fixed, right? Because I finally was a little hands-on for me. It's where I learned how to rebuild small engines and stuff like that, like stuff I don't do anymore. But I learned a lot of practical skills on a farm, and then when time got older and I was just like, I need a career choice. I was like, what the hell would take me further away from a farm? And I was like, technology. Like, there's no technology on a farm, which is not true. Nowadays, right. There's a lot of tech on farms. But I was like, let me get into that path. So, I didn't go to a traditional 4-year university. I went to a community college. I got my 2-year degree, and I was like, I'm never gonna stop learning, right? Like, I'm never gonna stop learning. Like, the thing in fact, I still am in talk with my old instructors from community college, right? Like, I still talk with them. I serve on the IT advisory board for that community college now, so like I still talk with them, and I'm like, hey guys, like I never stopped learning. I got my CompTIA stuff, my A plus, my Network Plus, my iNet Plus, right back when you had to learn how the internet works. Like, this is a browser, this is Gopher, right? Like way back in the day, this is a search engine. Like, there's an up and coming search engine called Google, and it's like that was literally the certification at the time, and my Server Plus and Security Plus and all the other fun stuff. And then I started saying like, hey, what else? I got my MCSE way back then when I was still the Microsoft Certified Systems Engineer. I got certified in a bunch of Microsoft stuff, got certified in a bunch of Cisco stuff, so I have my CCNA security. I was a certified ethical hacker, not technically anymore, but
went through that struggle.
Yeah, CISSP. Sometimes the continuing ed is a little much, right? Like, I'm starting to see that now too, where trying to spread out too much CLE over the years getting kind of tough. But I got my CISSP, my CCSP, my CYSA, my cybersecurity certs, and it's been a journey. I've originally, my first job was working for an accounting firm, and they put me on their audit team. So I was on their IT staff helping internally with like IT issues, but they also put me on the audit staff because this is where we want to talk about control frameworks, right? Part of the financial controls was like, hey, what controls do you have over your IT infrastructure? So we go into banks and hospitals and government, And like, so I picked up a lot of not only the methodology part of it, like, and the concepts behind the methodology, but also, you talk with the auditors and they're just like, God, government wastes so much. And, so I started digging, I
Yep.
started looking a lot into government budgets, which kind of drove my passion for getting involved in local government and everything. And did some work for a nonprofit for a few years, doing some transitional work with some developmental centers they were doing. So working with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, but we were going into these facilities as they were running and doing like some turnaround services with them. Like, how do we make these facilities better? So having a background in like IT and systems, and also having like some kind of financial information, like I was able to like be on their transition team and help turn some facilities around. And then wanted to get back into tech. Started working for an MSP at the time. They were a break fix shop, and I was like, they were interested in this recurring revenue model called managed services, and I was like, oh yeah, I know about managed services. I helped start way back when a managed services program at our accounting firm, or kind of worked through that, because at the time, a lot of CPA firms outsourced their internal IT department. So I was like, hey, I know enough about it to do it. So I built out a managed service platform. We implemented EOS, built out our cybersecurity platform, started doing some compliance as a service work and some CIO work there too, and ultimately stayed there for a few years. Had a wonderful time. That's how I met everyone I know nowadays in the MSP industry. Was like, I went to my first real IT conference, I think in like 2017. It was IT Nation. And I remember like walking in the door, and the first person I meet was my account rep at the time, who was TJ Harding, who's now at CyberFox, right? And like, me and TJ through the years have always talked, but that was like the first person I think I ever met in the MSP space. When I walked in, was like TJ, like the first person to introduce, talked to him, and like he was very nice. And I got to meet people like, it's like, who's this Adam Slutskin guy that's talking right now? Like, he was he was at ConnectWise at the time, and like Adam and I through the years have crossed paths many a times. He's a wonderful guy to talk to, wonderful guy to get to know. But like, as my introduction to the MSP community was in 2017, and over the years grew a lot, learned a lot, failed a lot, but ultimately felt a passion to help the MSP space grow. Because what I realized was, like, I was kind of working in a vacuum in what I wanted to do that MSP, and I always thought I was behind the game in what we were building out at our old MSP, and then come to realize that what we wanted to build out was much needed in MSP space. So doing a lot of talks, and eventually said, hey, what can I do bigger? And so I moved to the vendor side. So I was at Galactic Advisors before, and recently moved to Sherweb, where I'm their first Cybersecurity Technical Fellow. My job is to help educate the MSP space on cybersecurity, and help MSPs build their practice out, right? Like, part of me moving over there was to make sure that I was doing education first. That I was like, hey, I don't want to sell. Like, I don't want to sell. I just want to, and they were 100% behind it. They were like, we need someone who's going to help our MSPs grow and better our MSP space and build a bigger and better community for us. And I was like,
right.
That's what I'm down for. So my passion and my career have finally intertwined enough where I feel like I'm doing the Lord's work, in a way, and that's and that's my journey, right? That's how I got here today talking with you.
I absolutely love it. But you've got a really unique perspective, or maybe even an approach to how you not only address the MSPs that you work with and partner with, but ultimately their clients, because again, you were in their shoes of, hey, here's how I'm educating my small, medium businesses, down here in Louisiana. The problems aren't much different than Dayton, Ohio, or San Diego, California. Let me help you articulate a security program that you can present to your client. I think that's a really unique and advantageous perspective from your side. Life at the MSP, and then how that shifts your mindset as a vendor. Maybe how you approach different conversations, or help your MSP partners work through their problems.
Yeah. So I, on our MSP side, right, I was in charge of security, but also did a little bit of sales engineering and sat on a lot of sales calls. And, we were doing hard sales, right? We walk in there and be like, hey, we can solve all your problems. We have great ticket close rates. Look at our CSAT scores. Everybody loves us. And then that worked for that bottom line stuff. But when we started saying, hey,
Yeah.
our ticketing, our base package, whenever we started talking about cybersecurity and why they needed it, we were falling flat. Like our communications weren't. We were like, hey, you need to better protect your servers and your information. And we were struggling with why is no one biting, right? Like, no, this isn't working. And I don't know who I was talking with, but we started on the path of talking about control frameworks and risk management. And we were like, hey, what if we changed how we talk to our clients, right? This was during an EOS meeting, like a quarter meeting. I was they were like, hey, we're not selling as much cybersecurity as we thought, and cyber insurance was helping out a lot at the time, right? We needed requirements, so I was helping push us. But we were like, if not for that, we wouldn't be selling much cybersecurity, right? So how do we change that mindset? And we're like, all right, how do we talk business to people? And and we're trying to relate it to things that in real life, like what is it that if I walked into a place and they tried to sell me something, how would I know that I needed it? And we were talking about things like, hey, what if I went to the doctor? And when I went to the doctor, I walked in without me doing any kind of analysis or any kind of thing. He was just like, yeah, you definitely need to be on blood thinners, right? And you'd be like, why? You haven't told me anything. You haven't even run any tests. You haven't even told me what my risks are for it, because that's what your doctor does, right? You go for your yearly checkup, and they go, hey, this is they're gonna check your vitals, and they're gonna be like, look, you're 40 years old, your blood pressure is way too high, your risk of stroke and heart attack and long-term issues. You're too young to be having these. Like, let's work out a plan to get you better, right? And they're gonna exercise, change your diet. Here's a pill, whatever. You're more willing to accept those results whenever they tell you the why, whenever they understand the why, and that's whenever we were like, cool, we have to make sure
it's actually prescribed.
Yeah, it's prescribed to you, and you have to get our clients at the time to understand the why. Like, why do they need cybersecurity tools? And we did that through risk conversations, right? Risk conversations and storytelling. Storytelling is a huge part of it. I was actually listening, I forgot which podcast I was listening to at the time, but they were talking about the art of storytelling, oral tradition, right? Like, it's ingrained in us as people, right? We see a cave painting, and it speaks to us, right? Like, this must have been something important, and it tells a story. And like, it's a reason why museums exist for art and everything else, because those types of things tell stories for us, and it's very interesting. And I was like, hey, how do we apply storytelling to it? So we do that. We would go in and we would talk to clients about what they did for their business and what keeps them up at night, and we would tell stories about, like, hey, luckily we did a lot of incident response work, and we were like, hey, let's talk about a couple stories, and let's talk about not only the impacts to the business, but the impacts to the people in the business, right, and your clients. Because like, whenever an incident happens, the first thought that runs through your mind for a business owner whenever it's critical is like, will my business survive? They're not talking about how sometimes their employees may not get paid, and they have mortgages, and kids need clothes and food, and like we turn that into a whole story about all the things that we want to help prevent. It's not just about preventing ransomware at the end of the day. It's about preventing your employees from having to worry about payroll. And it's to prevent you, the business owner, is having to go have some pretty tough conversations sometimes with your clients about their data. And those are you start to talk about the stories, and you relate risk to them in a way that they understand. And then now what was looking like a financial investment is, we're not talking about dollars anymore. We're talking about more value driven. $50 per endpoint or whatever. Now you're having a value driven conversation, and you're more likely to change some hearts and minds that way. In the same way a doctor would talk to you about your health. And because that's the whole thing. Like, I have, when I go talk to my doctor, I have 2 kids, and I want to make sure they have a dad, right? And so like that's part of that's part of the risk conversation is like, hey, what do you see for your business, and what kind of outcomes do you want for your business, and how can we tie that back to what we can do as a technology provider to help resolve that, and technology going in policy, right? And let's be all encompassing in that conversation. And sometimes they bite, and sometimes they wouldn't, but I think we had a close rate in the 80s. I want to say
that's incredible.
Yeah, we were doing pretty well. We closed a lot, and like business boom when we changed that conversation. So like getting back to the point of like like in my new role, how do I help partners, right? And it's the same thing. Like we have a lot of great MSPs out there doing some really great things, but there's a lot of MSPs out there that need some help. And what we see sometimes, time and time again, was people who got into the MSP business because they're technical people, but they're not really business people. So when it goes to selling, sometimes they get a little too hung up on the technical side. And I tell people this, like, no one cares, for the most part, if you're using Sophos or SentinelOne or whatever, they don't care. They just want to know what you're doing and what you're protecting. So we get sometimes too hung up on, we'll put a FortiGate or a Sonic Wall in there, and like, tell you 95% of the conversation we have, nobody cares about that. What they do care about is, how does this help my business? How does this help my business run? How does this keep me from being off the front page of the local paper or off of social media or whatever you want to talk about? Like, that's the kind of things that we talk about, right? We all talk about reputation damage, so we kind of bring that whole conversation back. So what we want to do with MSPs is teach them the risk management way. Right? We want to teach them how to have those business conversations with them. And the whole point, right, is not to go into a discussion with a business owner looking to sell, but looking to educate. Right? We want to make sure you understand what's going on, the risk landscape, what's going on out there in the real world, the coming needs, what other businesses are doing, and tying that back down to how can we iteratively improve your security posture. We don't have to eat the elephant all in one day. We don't have to have everything done in a month, but we want to start having that discussion, and let's talk about where we can fit in and what you can afford, so we can get you there, right? And that is what we want to impart, and make sure that the MSP community out there understands it, that we change our conversations and our tactics a little bit, so that we can better protect small businesses out there, small and medium businesses, right? Like, we want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence in our job to explain to businesses what they're going to come up against, right? Because you'll be surprised how many conversations you still have about, we're too small for that to happen, or we can't afford that. And sometimes you have to drive some pretty interesting points home about the long-term costs of an incident. And I mean, look, I've done some incident response before where within a few months the business shuts the door, right? And in that case you had 9 people looking for new jobs, and I've had incidents where people lost contracts as part of an incident, and people have to go start looking for new work, and that's never a good thing to do. So sometimes you have to bring some of those points up and say, like, here's the real world results of not identifying risk and not identifying the issues your organization can face, and how do we get around that, right? I mean, we had one incident one time we had to work where a title attorney had poor controls over wire transfers, and $186,000 out the window, right, in a single transaction.
Oh my gosh!
Because it was a very complex attack. But if they would just picked up the phone and called the mortgage lender, or the mortgage lender, they wouldn't have had a problem. We had one time where someone wired $500,000 to the wrong account for their insurance policy, and they caught it 2 weeks later when the insurance agent called them and was like, "Hey, we never got your payment for your insurance." And
at that point, that money's long gone.
Oh yeah. So like, we got called in. We're like, "What happened?" I was like, "Well, let's go look at let's go look and see what's been going on in your Office 365 environment." And we're just like, well, they had no MFA, and like we just simple basic cyber hygiene that wasn't followed, and these types of things happen, and it happens quick. Like, it does not take long to say something like, oh yeah, here's a new account, wire your money to this account. Like, this is very opportunistic, and so that's what we try to talk about. Is we try to tell little stories. These are real life stories. I'm not trying to scare anyone,
right?
But this is something you may have to one day face. So how can we help prevent that from happening, right? And that's the conversations we have to start having, and we have to have on the flip side too with vendors is we have to have the enablement piece for our programs too, to say, hey, how can we better support you in your needs? What are you seeing, right? Because I'm telling you, like, within a year or two, not being in the MSP game, I will be semi out of touch, right? I won't be in the day-to-day basis, right? But what I want to do is make sure that I still understand what MSPs are going through, what they're facing, and how can us in Sherweb help them improve their practice and protect their clients at the end of the day, right? And that's the spirit of what I want to do.
And that's why it's important that you had the time on the MSP side, but then on the vendor side, you were exposed to so many different things, and you can share those stories with your MSPs and ultimately their clients because you have that unique perspective. We mentioned not using FUD. We're not sending them, the New York Times headlines of, hey, MGM got hacked, this could happen to you, because that's not going to resonate. That's not going to hit home for them. No. But if you can go to them and say, hey, here's how I was helping another small, medium business, for example, and it's not just ransomware. We talk about business email compromise. We talk about, hey, we sent money to the wrong account and that money went into the abyss and I never saw it again. It's a tough conversation to have with them. Or, hey, it's Christmas, you did get hit with ransomware, but what you didn't realize is that your payroll runs off of your ERP, and that was like phase 7 of our remediation plan. How are your employees going to buy Christmas presents for their families? Yeah. So it's having that conversation, being able to educate them on, here's how this happens, here's why it's important, and here's some mitigating controls we can put in place to not necessarily prevent that from happening, at all times, but reduce that risk.
Yeah, and so we'd walk in and say things like, hey, if if your building burned down tomorrow, what would we do? Or what if your server died? What would we do? And you'd be surprised at the answers you'd hear from our clients from the MSP side. So we'd hear things like, well, you guys got spare parts, right? You can just walk one over. I'm like, I don't have spare parts sitting around for your 8-year-old server. Like, this isn't going to happen. So we started having those kind of conversations, right? And then, so that evolved into like a basic business continuity plan. Like, okay, like, can we spin you up in Azure if you have on-prem, or can we move some of these services to SaaS applications? And can we do this, or can we move you to a colo? We've had so many discussions about people who had just too much investment in infrastructure, like servers, but hey, we needed to have some better resiliency with like electricity, resources, fire suppression, all the other fun stuff that comes with a colo, right? And like, how can we harden your systems, right, and move you to a colo? So we'd start to have those conversations with clients about some real world scenarios, and have them just do some thought exercises with them of, think about walking through this, what would you do, and how would you get in contact with all your employees to let them know that they're safe, like post hurricane. So like living in South Louisiana, hurricanes, right? Like, where it's a way of life. How if your building's got 8 feet of water in it, and everything's on your internal systems, how would you be able to even know to contact your employees? Where do you have that information? How do you even know if they're safe, right? And you start to have those kind of conversations, and it opens up their view to, hey, there's a lot that could happen, and how do we best do that while still maintaining a good bottom line, right? We don't want to spend $1 million to fix a $100,000 issue. Can't be 100% protected, but how can we harden some things so that we can do a little bit better? And we'd have conversations with them about, like, how much if you were down for a day, how much would it cost you, right? So we had one client, they were like, oh, we bill like $26,000 or $27,000 a day, small client in legal. We're like, cool, like, if we moved you to Office 365 off of that small business server you still have in the closet, like, we could definitely improve uptime here, especially in the event of a hurricane, right? Like, I'm pretty sure Office 365 would be, and your hosted exchange will be fine. And you start to have kind of those real world conversations with them, and you slowly are improving some posture. And then so through that process, our MSP was like, hey, we should adopt a framework. And if clients, if we run our clients through this framework and say you need to be doing X, Y, and Z, we wanted to make sure that we were properly addressing liability with them, and that we were also taking liability off of ourselves because we understood that we were slowly, as the landscape changed in the technology world and in the small business space, especially with cyber risk, that we were starting to take on a lot of liability in just existing as an MSP. And then I heard, and we had a conversation one time at a conference where we talked a lot about defensibility. And that was one where I was like, okay, we really need to be doing something better, right? Because the conversation started like this, like, how do we best defend our clients? And then I kind of said, like, well, hey, why are we talking about defending our clients when we should be defending our business first, right? Like, not just hardening our systems and hardening our RMMs and our PSAs and our tools, but, like, how do we protect our business first? Because if our business goes under, our clients are going to suffer. And that turned into a conversation of, okay, so how do we defend ourselves in our actions, and how do we defend ourselves, how do we defend our employees for their actions? How do we defend our bottom line? And lastly, as a result of this defensibility kind of list, is like, lastly, how do we defend our clients, right? That should be the last conversation, because we can't defend ourselves, we can't defend our actions, and we can't defend our staff's actions, right? Our employees' actions. How can we defend our clients? And so that became more of a, okay, how do we improve our MSP? And that's when we learned, hey, we should adopt some frameworks, and we should do a little bit better job at understanding defensibility, and how would I, right? And this is something I think that you'll hear a lot of people talk about, like, but having gone to court before for incident response, like, how do you defend your actions, especially if you have a group of a judge or potentially jurors, right, who don't understand technology. Like, I can't go in there and just talk about how smart I am and how good I am at cybersecurity. Like,
you can't show them logs; they're not going to understand. Yeah.
No, but what I can say is, hey, I have a framework that I follow. A bunch of smart government people or a bunch of people a lot smarter than me got together, and this is, if I follow NIST 800, 171, or 853 or whatever, I'd be like, hey, a lot larger organizations and a lot of more critical systems use these frameworks to protect their most sensitive data, and I follow that, right? So it resonates a lot better than saying, like, why'd you pick, X, Y, or Z to protect, or why'd you take these actions? You can't just say, like, as I like to jokingly say, I went to a conference and a vendor bought me a steak. Like, that just does not hold up in court, right? It's not something prudent that
right.
You could say. So you have to build your better practice of yourself, your business, because you want to be able to defend yourself and defend your employees, right? When we started doing change management, we thought that was going to, like, our staff was going to revolt because of an extra layer for them to do. But it saved their bacon a lot of times, because people would ask for things like administrative access on their computer, right?
Yep.
And we'd be like, hey, we have to go through a process for that. So it turned from us no longer having to say, we're denying you administrative access on your computer, because that's what it would probably sound like to most people. It turned into hey, I have to get approval for that. And that puts the onus back on the client to make a decision about administrative access, and we can help guide them through that, what they need, but it's no longer our decision. So we have better defensibility of our staff's action, our employees' actions, and that builds us up, right? That helps protect our business, because we want our business to survive. We want our employees to go home. We want our employees to collect a paycheck and continue to be employed. And we don't want to have an action on our point hurt them, right? Because that's one thing I never wanted to have happen, is that I make a very poor management decision, and I'm not the one that has to bear the brunt of it when that management decision comes to bear. And that was a big driving point home for me. So I want to make sure I defended our staff as well as our business, because if business doesn't exist, the staff won't have a place to go. So we got to make sure we protect our business, and that was the thought process. And if we can do that with our own MSP, right, and we can drink our own champagne, eat your own dog food, whatever, like, then we can relate that back to our clients. So that's what we want to do with MSPs, is say, how can we better build your practice, make your business more resilient, have you understand the process, and understand how this affects or protects businesses, and then you can then take that same treatment and apply it to your clients. And that's it.
It's so cool that mindset started with the community, whether it was other MSPs talking about maturity and defensibility, maybe vendors trying to push down some of their methodologies. So with that in mind, let's take a flashback to 2017, your very first event, and then fast track, here we are 7 years later. Talk about how the community, the MSP and channel community, has impacted you and how you've translated that to the businesses that you've been a part of and customers that you've impacted.
Yeah. I think part of it that I learned over the years is I used to be very reserved about what I talked about, and I learned that I really loved having those discussions with people about what affected them, and in order to have those, right, you have to open up and be vulnerable yourself. So that was one thing I really took home, was like when we would sit down and talk with a client, like there's really nothing off the record with regards to like what we're going to discuss.
Right.
And I would tell them like, hey, this is how I feel about a situation. I'll be open and honest about them. We'd have clients sometimes who were obstinate about the risk they faced, and I'd be like, hey, instead of closing up and being angry with them, do some reflective thinking a little bit and say, how could I have resonated with them a little bit better?
Yeah. Right.
And it changed my mindset a whole lot, and it kind of comes back to like working in the community and talking with people is how can I be open and vulnerable and honest with people, and at the same time make sure we have fruitful conversations, because that's the whole point. Like, we're not going to have a conversation if we're not doing things fruitful, and that turned into the conversation about education.
Right.
So every conversation that we'd have with clients should be educational. We changed even our QBRs, right? We used to go in there, QBR. Everybody hated doing our quarterly business reviews. It was hard to even schedule them because people were just like, he's going to sit here and come talk to me about ticket close rates and stuff we don't care about.
Let's buy more licenses.
Yeah, like it was just a bad conversation, right? Because we were talking, still sit down and talk with us. I'm like, you're boring them for an hour. Right, and it's a waste of their time. They got probably better things to do, or there's a golf course somewhere with an empty golf cart they could be using. Like, it's better things they could be doing with their time. So we were like, all right, how do we make this resonate? So we started adding more security related items to it, and then we were like, hey, how about we do like quarterly risk review, right? And not like just that. Not so much to the point of saying like, hey, you got open RDP ports or whatever, saying things like, hey, what's your business goals? Right? Do you think of growing? Are you thinking about opening a second location? And then you start talking to them about the capacity of their current systems, right? And the risk to their growth. And we started having this really cool kind of thought process one time. We were like, as an MSP, we shouldn't just be supporting business decisions. We should be helping drive them. Right?
Absolutely.
We should be sitting at the same table with the owner when they're talking with their attorney, right? Like, can I do this, and is it legal? Their CPA or their financial advisor, right? Do I have the money and do I have the capacity or financial capacity to make this endeavor? And my insurance person, right? Do I need to take more insurance out for liability? And they also need to come talk to us and wonder if their technology or their capabilities or they're able to meet their expansion and their goals, right? We want to sit at the same table. And we had condescendingly, we had a term where it was like, we no longer want to be just computer janitors. We don't want to come in and clean up the mess. And whenever it was kind of at the same time we were having that conversation, we were redoing our books internally, and we were putting specific services we use in the different columns. And I'm like, hey, what if people put us in the same column as like their attorneys and their CPAs? They thought of us as professional services instead of someone who comes in and just fixes things whenever they break, right? Like, what would change that mindset? And that started us down that path of like, hey, how do we have those business conversations? How do we change how we talk to people? Like, and that changed me into thinking that MSPs need to get out of the technology game and get into the risk management game and offer technology services to support and cover some of that risk, right? And yeah, that's all stem from conversations in the community. That'll stem from wondering how can we do things better. How's the landscape changing? How can we have those conversations with small businesses and medium businesses, and how do we figure out how to move ourselves in that balance sheet? And that was kind of just the driving force for me. Is like I don't want someone to think of us as an expenditure. I want them to think of us as a business driver, right? And we're always going to be an expenditure, but I don't want them to just think of us as a black hole they throw money into, and there's no value there in what we do. So that was the big.
You took the words right out of my mouth. Yeah. It was going through and helping your customers realize, hey, we are not here as a center of the answer is no, or you can't do that, you can't do this. Let's figure out a solution so that we can enable the business to succeed. Do you have the infrastructure set up to open that second location? Are there cost savings that can be done over in this area to enable you to spend more money on marketing, lead generation, etc.? And then also on the legal side, contractually with your clients, do they have cybersecurity requirements of you that you didn't even know about? Those ultimately fall on us. So I agree with you. Yeah. Right. Being able to say, well, I mean, you talked about, the different organizations that they're working with. Oftentimes they don't know the implications that they fall under. Yeah. I mean, we were having one of those quarterly reviews, right? We were like, hey, what drives revenue for you, or what is it that, if you lost, if you had a ransomware incident, like who would you need to contact, or who, we do work with Walmart. And I was like, I didn't know that. Like, what do you do for Walmart? They're like, oh, we do cases, like, when there's what this attorney would say, slip and falls, right? But when they have incidents in the stores, they were the ones who handled some cases for Walmart. And I was like, cool. Like, does Walmart tell y'all you have to follow any kind of requirements for the data that y'all have? And they were like, no. They're like, let me look at the contract. And in 1 or 2 lines, there was you have to protect the security and confidentiality and whatever of this data, and you have to follow Walmart's cybersecurity guidelines. And I was just like, what are those guidelines? He's like, I don't know. He's like, I figured we followed them because you guys were doing our IT work. And I was just like, let's look at that. Let's look at that. Yep. And it was massive. And so I was like, hey, look, here's what we need to do, right? We need to, there's things like, hey, you have to keep all audit logs for I don't know if it's 3 or 5 years. And they were like, yeah, but we have backups going on for years. I was like, not the same. This is why we need to have this conversation, because we need to make sure you understand, right, what it is you're getting into, and that we don't have any issues. Because what we don't want to find out when something bad happens is that you're going to breach a contract. And you're going to lose. And now Walmart's going to want to know what the heck was going on and why you signed off on that. And if you signed off on something that, if you attest to something in a contract and it doesn't, and you're not doing it, that's that could lead to some financial issues. Yourself are going to need an attorney.
Yeah, like nothing like a little bit of fraud between friends, right? And that opened up a whole lot of conversation with how we kind of started some of our compliance at our MSP. Was who else has these contractual requirements they're not following? And it was a lot.
Absolutely.
We had a lot of attorneys, and they were transferring data with like Walmart, Target, State Farm. They were, and like all of them had these contractual requirements. But going back to the client with Walmart, though, a year and a half later, right? We'd implemented tons of work. We spent a year straightening out things and putting in new controls and adopting policies, and also like transformed a lot inside their internal processes and their workflows. And a year and a half later, Walmart started this whole thing where they were going to start doing third-party audits to make sure you were meeting those requirements. And,
oh man!
And like it was 160 something questions, and half of them was on risk management and IT governance. Very little do. They didn't want to know if you had EDR. They were like, you have an EDR? Cool. Like, just check the box up. But they were like, hey, what does your risk management plan look like? What do you? How often does your IT steering committee meet, and what's the cadence for that, and who's on it? Do you have a risk? Do you have a risk register? How are you addressing risk in your environment? And like all this other stuff, and of course policies and procedures and all this other stuff. But like if we hadn't gotten in front of that,
that would have been bad news.
It would have been bad for them, right? Because Walmart would have been like, you're not doing anything you've been signing off on, and like, of course, we go through this audit, and Walmart's like, you get 80% or higher, you're good. We hit like 82%. We're like, like Walmart, like skin of our teeth, but Walmart's like, we need remediation plan for the rest of this stuff. We're like, cool,
Done.
this is cool. Like this client has already adopted this mindset, right? So we don't have to overcome the hardest part, which is buy-in.
Right.
They're already bought in. They're already 80% there. Let's give them another 10% and tell Walmart we're good. We're good at 90% or whatever. Like we can't. Like there's gonna be some things we can't do. Right.
Exactly. And here we'll tell you why. Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll tell you. We'll give you good reason why. It's not just you don't want to do it. It's extremely cumbersome for us to have a secure tier 3 data center to hold this one small server they still have on. Like we can't do some of these things, But like we go back to that original conversation I had with him about like how would this affect your bottom line if you lost this client? And it drove it home for him whenever he was the attorney was like, I'm glad that we had that conversation.
Yeah, he's like, thanks, Roddy.
Yeah, because like you pretty much set the path where at least we looked good. We didn't look great in front of our client, but we looked good.
But you didn't lose the client.
We didn't lose the client. We didn't lose the contract. That contract was 32% of their revenue. It was a huge contract.
Oh, that's scary.
Yeah. So I was like, and that was the conversation I had with him originally. It was like, hey, if you lose, if you lost this big contract or whatever, like what would happen? Like obviously the doors to the business aren't going to shut, but like who are you going to fire?
30%'s a big jump.
Yeah. Who are you going to fire? Right? You have to let someone go. Like who are you going to have to let go because of a poor business decision? Right? So like let's fix this now so we don't have to come across that, right? We want to be good stewards of our employees, we want to be good stewards of our community, and this is part of it. Right? It's not just about a financial number sometimes too. Like it's funny, we've done this thing where it's like we don't want to muscle and feel things anymore in the MSP industry. Just started going after hard numbers, but then we forgot that there's still a sense of community, there's still a sense of goodwill that we still have to put in place, we have to maintain. We can't 100%. Just go off. I wish someone had an ROI on how, or a good case study on how community drives bottom lines. Or, like we always jokingly laugh that the MSP world is going to be the first, like how a 5-figure bar tab relates to sales. Like that's going to be the MSP space breakthrough. We're going to be the ones that are going to write the first case study on how that works, right? Because we still have to have that mentality, that human relationship with everyone we run across. We still have to have those human to human connections and those human to human conversations, but at the same time still have a business decision too. You can't do just one or the other. You have to have both, and it's a little bit of science, a little bit of art sometimes in those conversations, right? I always say it's the creative piece of science, right? Like science is very formulative and it's very precise, but the breakthroughs come from people who just said like, hey, I wonder what happens if I try to make like, I don't know, a new Teflon, and they come up with like WD-40, right? Like the story of WD-40,
right.
And, like and a lot of things, trial and error. It's not science isn't always scientific. We say sometimes, and like that's part of it too. When we have those conversations with our clients, or our partners' clients, or our small business owners, like, yeah, cool, we can talk tech and we can talk business side, but like, how can we relate those things to what they care about? If they care about their community and they care about their employees, like that's part of the conversation to be having with them. But it's just about learning how people tick and making sure that you're still human to them at the end of the day. And when bad things happen, right, you're still a human being to them too, because they're going through a lot. So I always told our staff when the incident happens and like it's real bad, I'm like, well, first thing first is you guys are counselors first and technicians second. Because you're going to have some really emotional people, and they're going to be really concerned, and they're not going to be thinking straight, and like you're not there to reason with their emotions, but you're there to just you gotta give some people.
You're here for them.
Yeah,
right?
you're here for the people. You're here for the humans first, and the technology second. Like I can stop an exfil of data at a small business by going unplug the firewall, right, and the exfil stops. But like
from a forensics perspective, please don't
unplug the power. Don't
unplug the power.
No, I meant unplug the physical connection on the WAN to bring that interface down. But don't unplug the power. I will. Yeah,
Everybody, please
don't ever power down a system, a server. Don't touch anything.
Save the forensics.
Yeah,
but no, I'm there with you.
Yeah,
yes,
contain first. Contain your incident first. Don't destroy evidence. But yeah, we do stuff like that. Like I can go unplug the WAN connection on the firewall and stop the exfil of data, right, on a small business. But like you're gonna spend the next 2 hours talking the business owner sometimes off the ledge. Be like, hey,
absolutely,
it's cool. Like, let's get your it was always fun because I'd say, hey, let's get your insurance guy in the room, let's get your attorney, let's get your CPA, let's get your other people. Like, let's come to a decision here about what we're going to do next, right? It's not the end of the world. Other businesses go through this all the time. We got you, right? We'll do everything we can to make your business whole. That's your first step, is your reassurance. And hey, you got to be a human to people at the end of the day. And I want people to not forget that.
Right. And so I want to go back to one thing you said about the collaboration, making sure that your messaging hits home with ultimately your end client. Talk to me about the importance of vendor and partner collaboration.
Yeah.
Because us vendors are oftentimes in our bubble. You talked about it, a little bit earlier. Hey, 2 years out of the MSP space, I'm going to be a little bit disconnected. Talk to me about why it's so important for vendors and partners to continuously collaborate, and then maybe talk about ways that you plan on doing so.
Yeah. So like part of that, like we talk about, and I made some notes. I'm gonna pull up my notes here. The MSP business model sometimes changes, right? Like we've gone. I mean, think about the MSP model, right? From break fix to MSP to even compliance or even to like a recurring revenue model. Like those things change, and we have to tweak that over time because we want to make sure the way we communicate and the way we talk to MSPs is the same thing from the MSP side of how we talk to clients. We have to make sure we relate to their business. And
right.
Business models constantly evolve, they change, thought process do, markets change, technologies change, right? We have to make sure that conversation is going on, because if we can't relate to what we're doing to our partners' business model or their goals at the end of the day, I feel like it's a little bit contradictory for us to tell our partners to make sure they understand their clients' business needs, but then we don't understand our own partners' business needs, right? Like
exactly,
it's a little out of touch, right? So that's part of it. Like when we better understand MSP business models as a whole, but also our individual partners' business models and how they do things, we can better relate our services and how we can better support them, right? Through education initiatives and through community and through non-technology solutions, right? Because we can always offer them a new item on the line card or
right.
A new service from vendor X, Y, and Z, right? Because as Sherweb, we do produce an actual product. We have Office Protect. It's a product that Sherweb produces. But for the most part, we're a marketplace, but we're a lot more than that. Like we try to do a lot more education. We try to do a lot more partner enablement. We try to make sure that we understand what the space is, right? So that's part of it, right? You have to have that constant communication so you understand your client's business model, right? But we also have to make sure that at the same time we stay on the pulse of things from the MSP side, right? Because we're working with MSPs of all different sizes, right? We have some that are doing $400,000 a month in Office 365 licensing. We have some that are doing $400,000, right? And we have to make sure that we understand both sides of that, right? And how they and how those and how they kind of interact with different products, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how what new products are coming to market that better fit into those different sizes, right? Because different MSPs always have different ways of making sure that they that their, I guess, solutions and their methodologies, how that works in with their clients. So we have to make sure that we are constantly meeting them and understanding where that's coming from, right? We also have industry trends and a few other things, but the whole point is like it's this community of things. We're not just us. It's not a transactional thing. We're not just giving you a license and you giving us dollars. Like we have to build up something bigger than that, and that's kind of the soft thing I talked about, right? Like, what is it that's not just scientific about our relationship with our partners, right? What is it that actually drives them? How can we better understand that? How can we better position ourselves in the marketplace to provide for them or enable them? And that's going to be a constant communication thing. I mean, we have a pack, right? We have a Sherweb pack. We have partners that come in and talk with us and say, like, hey, here's where we want to be. Here's where we're having roadblocks. But the same point is, like, that doesn't just have to be with our, 20-ish, I forgot how many pack members, right? It also has to be with people throughout the stage of their journey in the MSP space. Like, what is it we could be doing better, and bringing that back and saying, how do we help you in that process, right? And that's across the board. Even at when I was at Galactic Advisors, right? Like, part of my thing was they were like, hey, what could help us enable MSPs to sell compliance as a service if they've never sold it before, or VCIO offering if never sold it before? And I was like, well, they're smart people, right? But what is it that they're missing? And everybody thought tech, and I was like, no, like, how do we help build their confidence to sell a new product that they may not fully understand? It's not a technical, like, VCIO services isn't really technical, right? It's not green, red, and amber lights. It's not on off switch, right? It's a lot of high level discussions and business discussions. And like, if we can figure out a way of building that confidence with them. So what we did was we pulled in some partners who were selling it and saying, like, hey, what was it that made you really help out with your first sales? How did you get those first sales under your belt? How did you get to a point where you don't need us to back you anymore and you've got all the resources you need? And so we started that conversation with them, and that helped us build out a model of, like, when we have a new partner who's never sold before, how do we talk to them so that they feel confident approaching a client about that? And then once our partners had 2, 3, 4 sales or whatever under their belt, like, we heard from them less and less. So on our end, right, that was less time our partner success manager had to spend on the phone, right? We still had check-ins, we still talked with them, but it was less time trying to get them to make that one sale. They were self-enabled to go in and make those sales, and they were doing it. And we could focus on other partners who were having struggles and helping them build. So, like, getting that feedback of, like, what's working, what's not working, what is it with our resources, right? Because at Sherweb we have a ton of resources at our disposal that we could use. How can we take those resources and help provide for you as well, right? So the whole marketing sales enablement portion, right? Like, how do we help you at the end of the day build your business, right? And taking all that feedback in and saying, okay, in our scope and in what Sherweb does, how can we leverage our resources for that, right? And that's a lot. And the same thing else. We want to make sure our support's great. Right? We want to make sure that you call us with an issue and we're working through it, that you feel supported in that, and it's not going by the wayside. We want to make sure that we're not a roadblock between you and your clients too, in your client success. We don't want to be that single point of failure either. So that's a whole lot of it. That collaboration piece, actually sitting down and listening and turning that into, like, an actual action items and a roadmap for our partners, so they know that we're working on things, is a huge part of it. Because they have to know. I mean, like, if you walk into a room and I tell you, like, here's the things that I need, and, like, I don't have any idea when they're getting done, like, I'm going to lose faith in the fact that they actually happen.
Right.
So building roadmaps for them, what we want to do, how do we make this better, tweaks, that's all important. But it all comes back to sitting down and talking with people of all shapes and sizes, right? Because, look, I was a $3 million a year MSP whenever I left and came to the dark side of the vendor space, and some of the information I could bring to the table was probably more important than sometimes some MSPs 4 times my size, right? So getting past the fact that in the MSP world, that seat size or dollar amounts is also a sign of maturity, was a big learning point for me too, and something I want to try and push as well. It's like, you can have some small few $1 million MSPs who have a really high maturity level who you could get a lot of good information from about how they did that.
Yeah.
And then turning around and going to your big partners and saying like, hey, here's some things we could improve upon your process, or the way we talk, or the way we set some of our other partners up for success. So it's a weird mix of what I'm trying to figure out, right, on the vendor side.
Yeah.
How do we make sure that we don't ignore, we have the right partners we're talking to, and that we're actually getting valuable feedback.
Right. No, that's super cool. And before we wrap up, I want to highlight you and the great work you're doing. Talk to me about how partners, or even non-Sherweb partners, can reach out and utilize you.
Oh, easy. I tell everyone, like, you don't have to be a Sherweb partner to pick my brain. I am here for the community, and that was something that I imported upon during my discussions moving to Sherweb. Was like, I'm going to produce content, right? I produce, like, I'm going to be working on content for Sherweb, but I'm also going to be working on my own content. So people can, I'm easily findable on LinkedIn and social. They can talk to me about anything. If they have questions about how their MSP, or some problems they're having with their MSP, like, that's what I'm here for, is to help our community and our space grow. I'm not I'm here to help our Sherweb partners. Let me be fairly clear on that. Like, I am here for our Sherweb partners to make sure they grow, but I'm also here to make sure our community and our space is better, because
continues to flourish. Yep.
Yeah, we continue. We want to make sure that that the work we do at Sherweb is grows outside the scope of just our partners, right? We want to make sure that our communities that our community grows, and the ideas and the knowledge isn't just self-contained and siloed, right? We want to make sure that we spread the love, and that everyone grows around us, right? Like the old adage of rising tides, right? We want to make sure that it's not just us that's rising along with it; that it's everyone, right? We want to make sure that we care about everyone, and the work we do to help protect the world in a way, and we want to make sure that we impart that wisdom on everyone. So my role is to make sure that our MSP bubble, our little world, continues to expand and grow, and that we grow the industry in a mature and responsible way. And that's my personal and life and professional goal right there, is growth.
I know for a fact that you are going to do nothing but absolutely crush it in that role. And for anybody listening that hasn't had the pleasure of meeting Roddy, I would highly recommend you reach out, not just on the, hey, teach me about cybersecurity and MSP landscape, also just get to know him as a person. He's a great one. But with that in mind, Roddy, thank you very much for jumping on. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course.